want to put your tongue in here. Do you understand me?
Oh, yeah, yes.
Doubting me?
Oh.
Want to doubt me more?
Okay, fine, you know what? I know I f***ed up all day, but that doesn't mean I need to go anywhere.
Why do you hurt yourself? Why do you hit yourself?
Because I'm angry.
Why do you pinch yourself?
Because I'm angry.
Why do you want to bruise yourself?
Because I'm angry.
And what does that do for you?
It makes me feel better.
It makes sense? That makes sense?
Yes, to me it makes sense.
Dr. Rosario.
Dr. Rosario.
Behind the facade of innocence, darkness lurks. A world where truth is twisted and loyalty is demanded. They prey on the vulnerable, manipulate the minds, and commit unspeakable acts. Throughout history, cults have cast long shadows. They promise salvation, but deliver damnation. Welcome to the world of cultish crimes. Sending your child off to college is a bittersweet moment. It's exciting for them, but for us as parents, it can be extremely nerve-wracking. We worry about everything. We worry about how they'll do their laundry and what they'll eat, how will they cope in the world without our daily guidance. But nobody ever thinks, I hope my child doesn't join a cult while at college. Well, parents, I don't mean to add to your fears, but in today's case, we will be discussing something just like that. In today's story, a group of college kids were preyed on by their friend's dad and landed up in the most unimaginable situation. But before we go any further, welcome to Crime Rush. I'm Inga, and I'm so happy to have you with me. Please take a moment to like this video and to subscribe. And also, if you enjoy this type of thing and you're fascinated with cults, I have a whole playlist that's called Cultish Crimes, where you can find many more videos like this one. But without further ado, let's jump into today's case. Lawrence Greco was born in 1959 in the United States, and everyone called him Larry. Larry grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and lived with his mom and dad and his younger brother Carl. Larry's parents divorced when he was young, leaving a trail of rumors and speculation about his troubled childhood. Allegations of sexual abuse by his maternal grandfather during his early years persist, with reports suggesting his grandmother, despite awareness, failed to intervene and even subjected him to verbal and physical abuse. Larry also always felt like his grandparents and his mom favored his younger brother Carl, and that really made him bitter. His mom eventually remarried, and he then took his stepfather's surname. After leaving school, he enlisted in the Air Force, but he abruptly dropped out after only 19 days. Larry maintains, though, that there was a valid reason for his brief stint in the military.
Because I had a high-frequency hearing loss, and they didn't pick it up when I went for the initial physical, and I wanted to actually be a pilot. And when they gave me another physical, they said that I shouldn't even been allowed in because of my high-frequency hearing loss.
But then Larry would go on to do something very impressive. He managed to worm his way into a position as a stockbroker on Wall Street, and he did this without a college degree.
That's actually what I did, all through the 80s.
You were able to get a job as a broker without a college degree?
Of course. In fact, some of the people who have made the most money and wealthiest people who came out of Wall Street did not have college degrees.
Now, before I continue, there is something you must know about Larry. He has exceptional social skills, and his ability to charm and manipulate people is almost unbelievable. From his position in Wall Street, he managed to make some connections with people in high places. He also went on to work as a consultant for construction, gambling, and insurance companies. He even started his own insurance company, opened a nightclub with another prominent businessman, and became a partner of a fancy Italian restaurant that would often cater to politicians. Larry was even contracted by the CIA to help with international affairs. And through all of his contacts, he eventually came to know a man by the name of Bernard Kerik. Bernard Kerik served from 1998 to 2000 as Commissioner of the New York City Department of Correction, and then as New York City Police Commissioner, during which he oversaw the police response to the September 11 attacks.
Hey,
explosion has just occurred. Everyone is running from the entire financial district now. The smoke is filling the entire area. Let's go. Come on, go, Brad, go. Stop shooting, Brad, go.
Cameraman Brad Waite captured moments never to be forgotten.
Mayor, any idea how this happened?
Not right now. Not right now.
Correspondent April Woodard was already there when she encountered Mayor Rudy Giuliani, who was getting his first look at the disaster.
As you can see, there's debris all over.
After the 2003 invasion of Iraq, President George W. Bush appointed Bernard as the Interior Minister of the Iraqi Coalition Provisional Authority. In 2004, Bush nominated Bernard to lead the Department of Homeland Security, and Larry and Bernie, as he called him, became extremely close friends. They were so close that Larry was actually Bernard's best man at his wedding. And Larry already had some pretty big connections, but now with Bernie as his close friends, he made even more powerful connections. He even came to know Rudy Giuliani, who was the mayor of New York at the time. And then Bernie introduced Larry to FBI Special Agent Gary Hewer. Recognizing an opportunity, Larry presented himself to this special agent as an associate of the mafia. He claimed that he had connections with many crime families. And this wasn't a complete lie, because Larry would often rub shoulders with some of these crime families at his nightclub. And this intrigued Gary Hewer, and eventually he enlisted Larry as an FBI informant. Larry's primary task was to gather intelligence on a suspected scheme involving the Gambino crime family. However, the FBI eventually discovered that Larry was providing them with false information, and that his true objective was to maintain close proximity to the FBI while concealing his own involvement in the very scheme that they were investigating. Larry and his co-conspirators were indicted on charges of securities fraud. And in order to evade prosecution, Larry reached out to his good friend, Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik, for assistance. He asked Bernie to intervene with the FBI to ensure the dismissal of the charges, but Bernie couldn't do that. Facing his own personal and professional challenges, including potential involvement in questionable activities, Bernie was unwilling to jeopardize his position by assisting Larry. In 2003, Larry Ray was sentenced to 5 years probation, but this was devastating for him. His whole life started to fall apart. His story was plastered on every newspaper in New York, and it seriously damaged his reputation. But I think it's important for us to also go over his personal life, just to give you a better understanding of who we are actually dealing with here. Larry married a woman named Teresa in 1988. They had 2 daughters, Talia, who plays a significant role in today's case, and then 11 years later, they had Ava. By 2004, their marriage just started to fall apart. You see, Larry was abusing Teresa mentally, verbally, and physically. He also cheated on her countless times. He would then also abuse the woman he was cheating on Teresa with. He would reportedly make them go have sex with strangers for his pleasure. Ultimately, Teresa filed for divorce in October of 2004 when Talia was 14 and little Ava was only 4 years old. But this is when Larry started dedicating considerable effort into influencing his daughter's perspectives. While Ava was too young to fully grasp the situation, his methods proved very effective with Talia. Talia was a daddy's girl, and she believed everything Larry told her and would always take his side. Larry went through great lengths to convince Talia that her mom was a bad person and didn't love her. He even convinced her that her mom and relatives on her mom's side SA'd her and her little sister. But then one day, Larry and Teresa had a massive argument and Larry hit her. Teresa then phoned the police, and when they arrived, Larry told them that Teresa was in fact the one that harmed him. Talia, of course, corroborated her dad's story, and as a result of this, the police had to take Teresa out of the home, and Larry was granted temporary custody. The police then conducted an investigation and they questioned Talia and Ava. Talia, of course, told the police that her mom was horrible, that she abused her, and that relatives on her mom's side abused her too. Larry and Talia even created online platforms to publicize these allegations. But when police asked little Ava, she said that her mom never hurt her and that her dad only wanted her to say that. Teresa's lawyers actually requested that Larry undergo a psychological evaluation, and the report from the forensic examiner was shocking. And I'm just going to quote some of the pieces that I found to be very interesting. It is literally impossible to evaluate Mr. Ray in the usual clinical manner. His personality dynamics are so configured that he is able to manipulate and control almost any situation in which he finds himself, including a psychological interview with a forensic examiner. No matter how experienced that examiner may be, Mr. Ray is very good at what he does. So that should make it clear how manipulative and convincing this man can be. Teresa was awarded full custody of Ava and Talia in February of 2006, but Larry refused to hand the children over. He was telling everybody that Teresa was in cahoots with Bernard Kerik and Rudy Giuliani, and they were all conspiring against him so that he would lose his children. So he was arrested for interference with custody and was sentenced to 6 months in prison in June of 2007. During this time, Teresa also decided that it would be a great idea to enter into a relationship with Larry's younger brother, Carl. And Larry was infuriated, understandably so. I guess I can agree with Larry on this one point. Ava reunited with her mom, but Talia was already too far gone. She believed her mom was evil, and she really wanted nothing to do with her after she was the reason why her dad was in prison. And to make matters worse, she was now dating her uncle. That part I get once again. But Talia also believed that her mom was really conspiring with Bernard Kerik and Rudy Giuliani. This, of course, was not true. It was a complete lie, but Talia was convinced of it. So instead of going to live with her mom, she emancipated herself and went to stay in a youth shelter. Now, while in prison, Larry would make a friend by the name of Lee Chen. And of course, Larry goes on to share everything about his life with Lee. He tells him why he's in prison and that it's Bernard Kerik and Rudy Giuliani and his ex-wife's fault. And Lee Chen actually ends up believing all of this. They become extremely close friends in there. They become so close that Lee offers Larry a place to stay when he gets out of prison. Now, Lee wasn't going to be in prison for very long. He was going to get out before Larry. But he said to Larry, if you get out, you can come and stay with me in my Manhattan apartment. And when Larry got out, he actually took Lee Chen up on his offer. He also got to reunite with Talia, but sadly not for long, because Larry was arrested again after he abused yet another girlfriend of his. This was a violation of his 5-year probation, and Larry was sentenced to 3 years in prison. He was released from prison in September of 2010, but this time, instead of taking Lee Chen up on his offer to go and stay with him, Larry decided he had a better option. Sarah Lawrence College is a prestigious private liberal arts college located in Bronxville, New York, just a short distance from New York City. This college prioritizes individualized learning, close faculty mentorship, and a strong liberal arts education. People like Vera Wang, Sigourney Weaver, Carrie Fisher, and many more celebrities attended Sarah Lawrence. And now Larry's daughter, the apple of his eye, Talia Ray, was also attending Sarah Lawrence College, and she was studying to be a lawyer. And unlike most of her friends, Talia knew exactly what she wanted to do and what she wanted to be. She wanted to be a lawyer because she wanted to help people like her dad, who she felt were wrongfully accused. Talia successfully completed her first year at college, and within that first year, she formed very close friendships. Her friends noticed something very unusual about her though. She was always talking about her dad, Larry, no matter what the setting was. If they were playing video games, Talia was talking about Larry. If they were drinking at a party, Talia was talking about Larry. And whenever someone tried to change the subject, she would just steer the conversation back to him. And she told stories about him. She made him sound like the biggest hero. She spoke about his time on Wall Street, the special military operations he was involved in, his influential connections, how he worked for the CIA, and his supposed wrongful imprisonment, claiming he was a victim of government conspiracy. While her friends found her constant focus on her dad quite peculiar, they were also quite intrigued by all the stories she told about them. And when they started to doubt her a little bit, she would actually pull up photos as proof of her dad with really prominent people. And they thought like, wow, this guy sounds really interesting. As Talia and her friends began their sophomore year at Sarah Lawrence, they had the option of moving from traditional dormitories to larger townhouse-style residences on campus. This little complex of townhouses was called Sloanham Woods, and Talia and her friends moved into number 9. But this is not your average townhouse though. It's huge. It's got a living room, it's got a kitchen, and it's got 8 bedrooms. This was a major step up from their dorm rooms, and they said it felt like they were just living in their own home, just with no supervision, just finding themselves and having fun. And the college kids who moved in together were Talia, Isabella, who was Talia's best friend, Santos, who was Talia's boyfriend at the time, Daniel, Claudia, Juliana, Gabe, and Max. Another girl by the name of Raven also spent a lot of time there because she was very close friends with Claudia, and she was also dating Daniel at the time. About a month into Talia's sophomore year, Larry phoned her and said he was going to be released from prison. Talia immediately went to her roommates and excitedly told them that her dad was going to be released from prison. But she wanted to ask a favor. She wanted to know if it would be okay if Larry just crashed on their couch for like just a week or 2 until he could find his own place. Talia's friends knew how much her dad meant to her. And although the thought of her dad sleeping on their couch weirded them out a little bit, they thought it would be fine. I mean, they already felt like they knew the guy because Talia would never shut up about him. But I mean, what's a week or 2? So they agreed. And Talia immediately phoned Larry and told him that it was all good. When Larry showed up, Talia jumped into his arms and she was absolutely ecstatic to have her dad back in her life. But the other students were a little bit shocked by his appearance. They were almost expecting like a James Bond type of person to walk into the door after all the stories Talia told about him. But Larry just looked like a normal, boring dad. He didn't look like anything special. From day one, Larry started sharing stories of his life with Talia's friends. He spoke about being a Marine, about his time in the CIA, going on missions against foreign leaders, and even working with NATO. And just when the roommates would start to think maybe he's lying, Larry would pull out photos and documents as proof. The very first day he arrived, he also brought up Bernard Carrick, who he said was part of a corrupt police force that was out to get him because he knew all their secrets that were related to the 9/11 attack. And you will come to find out throughout the story that Larry has a deep hate for Bernard Carrick. I mean, this man, he can hold a grudge. I'll give him that. And he's always thinking that someone's conspiring against him and that Bernard Carrick is trying to get at him somehow. Now, just to refresh your memory, Larry was only in the military for 19 days, and he was only loosely tied to the CIA. So he really had a way of embellishing his stories to make them sound extraordinary. But very quickly, the roommates started to feel a little bit weird about Larry being there. I mean, he was always in the living room, and that meant that they couldn't play their video games much anymore. And also, Larry was a talker. If they just went to speak to him, they would be stuck there for hours. But there were some perks that came with Larry staying there. He kept the kitchen clean, and he was cooking meals for them. He was buying them pizza and taking them out for fancy dinners. I mean, that type of stuff can mean a lot for a college student. And if you're wondering where Larry got the money for all of this stuff, reportedly he had sold a bunch of domains that were worth a lot of money back then, and also had some money left from scams he had pulled off before he went to prison. But the students soon came to realize that the real problem was that Larry wasn't just crashing on their couch for like a week or two, as Talia said. No, he was actually living there now. One night, Larry called a house meeting. He said he wanted to share his philosophy with the students. He called it a quest for potential. He said he could help the students unlock their full potential and that he could significantly improve their lives with his knowledge. He suggested that they have counseling sessions with him, and he really came across as a person that cared for them, that wanted to help them to just be better humans, you know? And while some of them were okay with this, there were a few that thought this was pretty weird. Raven, for one, disliked Larry from the start, and she just had a bad feeling about him. Juliana, Max, and Gabe, they were just disinterested, and they just tried to avoid Larry as much as they could. But Larry would soon pounce on his first victim. As I mentioned before, Isabella was best friends with Talia. But Isabella had just gone through a horrible breakup and was also the only person in the group of friends who was far away from home. Her parents lived in Texas and she was very lonely. Talia was like her only friend. Isabella seemed very insecure and introverted. Many people who knew her described her as someone who was trying to hide from the world. They said she was always hiding behind her hair even, and she always seemed so sad and reclusive. But she still had her hopes and dreams. She really wanted to become a doctor and make something of her life. But Larry almost immediately identified something in her and started to work on her. He started counseling sessions with Isabella on a daily basis. And then one evening, the students all noticed that Larry had been in Isabella's bedroom for hours. But then Larry came out and explained to them that Isabella was really going through something horrible and she needed a lot of help. From there, Larry started to sleep in Isabella's bed, telling everyone that he needed to be there for her so that he could comfort her. By this time, as you have probably guessed, Larry had manipulated his way into a sexual relationship with this 19-year-old girl. In no time, Larry had convinced Isabella that her mom was a bad mom and that she had been SA'd by a family friend when she was young, but that she had just suppressed the memory as a coping mechanism. And when the time came for Isabella to go home for Christmas break, she phoned her mom Cindy and told her she would not be coming home for the holidays. When her mom asked why, Isabella actually handed the phone over to Larry. Now, just be aware that Cindy at this point knew who Larry was, sort of, you know, because Isabella was always talking about him. But she just thought it was a dad that stayed close by that was sort of looking out for her daughter because she was best friends with his daughter. And it was almost like a bit of a comfort for her. But when Larry took the phone and spoke to Cindy, he told her that Isabella had been SA'd when she was young and that if she returned home, she would end her life. Cindy was shocked. She knew nothing about this at all. And then Larry even told her, quote, "Cindy, you were a terrible mother back then. You were negligent. You didn't protect your daughter. That was then. That's not today. Today, you probably would not let that happen." End quote. I mean, the audacity of this man is astounding. But Cindy didn't want Isabella to harm herself, and she didn't have the money to fly there to sort all of this out. So she decided the best thing to do would just be to give Isabella her space. And this would be something that she would come to regret. But the crazy thing was that everyone noticed that Isabella all of a sudden seemed to be doing great. She was smiling a lot. She seemed more confident, outgoing, and happy. And her roommates couldn't help but give Larry the credit for this incredible transformation. After all, it was after Larry's intervention that they could see a positive change in Isabella. And this just made it easier for Larry to lure in his next victim. Santos is from the Bronx in New York, where he grew up with both his parents and his two older sisters, Yalitza and Felicia. Santos was a soft and kind person. His parents were from the Dominican Republic and could not speak a word of English, so he always felt much closer to his older sisters than he ever did to his parents. His mom was always working and his dad was never home, and Santos always assumed that his dad was out having extramarital affairs, and this really bothered him. To make matters worse, they didn't have a lot of money. They really struggled. So he and his sisters had to work extra hard to ensure that they could get into a college. Santos also struggled with his mental health, and in high school, he actually tried to end his own life. Luckily, he was unsuccessful, but he never really dealt with it. Now, at the time that Larry moved in, Santos was dating his daughter, Talia, and of course, he wanted to make a good impression on Larry. Now, when Santos saw the amazing effect that Larry's help was having on Isabella, he decided to go and speak to Larry too. He shared about his family and how hard it was growing up, and even how he tried to end his own life in high school. And Larry, when he spoke, he just hit the nail on the head every single time. It really sounded like he knew exactly what the dynamic was like in Santos's family. And Santos was amazed by this. He told Santos that his parents never gave him the love and attention that he needed and that he desired. And because of that, he felt uncertain. And to move on, he needed to remove the toxicity out of his life. And that included his parents. This actually made a whole lot of sense to Santos, and it resonated with him. He immediately felt lighter and unburdened. He quickly came to appreciate and admire Larry for the amazing change he could feel within himself. And everyone else saw it too. Santos was more confident. He was just overall a better and happier person. The only thing was, he had cut his parents out of his life completely. Claudia is from California and has been described as artsy, eccentric, and fun-loving. But she struggled with depression. She was close friends with Raven, and as I mentioned before, Raven really disliked Larry. And Claudia and Raven would often discuss how weird it was to have Larry around. I mean, this was just a dad who was living with them on campus. But over time, Larry got her alone every now and then, and they would talk for hours. Claudia shared about her insecurities and about her depression. And before you knew it, Larry had her convinced that she was a schizophrenic. And what do you know? She was also abused as a child. One night, the others came to Claudia and asked her if she wanted to hang out and smoke some weed. This is something that they always did together. But now, Claudia said, "No, I'm sorry, I can't do that because I'm schizophrenic. And the weed will have a damaging effect on my disorder." Raven was shocked. I mean, she was friends with Claudia and she had never heard anything about schizophrenia before. And when Claudia told her that Larry was the one that said she was schizophrenic, Raven just went berserk. She tried to tell Claudia, Larry's not a psychiatrist. He can't diagnose you with anything. But Claudia was like, "No. You telling me that I'm not schizophrenic is not going to help me get any better." And just as with the other students, there was a massive change in Claudia. She seemed to be a lot happier. Daniel is from New Jersey and grew up with both his parents and a brother who was 12 years older than him. He was known by all his friends as a sweet person, but he was unsure of his sexuality and felt a little socially awkward at times. As I mentioned before, Daniel was dating Raven at this point, and Raven made it pretty clear that she didn't like Larry. But at the same time, Daniel and Raven's relationship was tumultuous. They were fighting constantly, and this was weighing heavy on Daniel. And Daniel was quite close with Santos, so one evening he confided in him a bit about how horrible his relationship with Raven was. And because Santos had such a wonderful experience with Larry, he suggested that Dan go and speak to Larry about his problems. And Daniel thought, like, what harm could it do, you know? So he eventually met up with Larry at a coffee shop in New York. And what do you know? He started to bare his soul to him. He spoke about his life at home and how his mom was really sick through most of his childhood. And then he also told Larry that he was a bit confused about his sexuality. Larry then asked Daniel, "Are you attracted to men?" And Daniel gave it a little bit of thought and he said, "No, I don't think so." And before he could go on, Larry assured him and said, "Daniel, I know that you are not gay. I know it for a fact." And Daniel said that the way Larry told him this was so authoritative and so convincing. He believed him. It was such a relief to just get a straight answer from someone, and he felt like a massive weight had been lifted off of his shoulders. Larry also flattered him by telling him how intelligent he was, and due to his intelligence, he would overcomplicate things in his mind. He would make things much more complicated than what they needed to be. And Larry was going to show Daniel how to be a successful adult. And then Larry became a bit more personal. He started asking really strange questions and eventually moved on to the question of how big Daniel's penis was, which is very disturbing on so many levels. And then Larry moved on to Raven, and he told Daniel that he believed that Raven was standing in his way of fulfilling his purpose. She was bringing him down in life, and that Daniel just needed to break it off with her.
And by the end of the conversation, he had convinced me that I should break up with my girlfriend and that I didn't have to feel any kind of that I owed her anything. I should just send a message and end it.
Daniel was already at the point where he felt like he needed to break up with Raven. The relationship was just very toxic. But now, once again, Larry had just given him a straightforward answer, and it felt good to hear just what he needed to do. And before you knew it, Daniel picked up his phone and he broke it off with Raven. Raven was furious, and when she found out that Larry was involved somehow, she became even more upset. But Daniel told Raven, if you don't care about Larry, then you don't care about me, because Larry is helping me. And can we just take a moment and really feel for what Raven is going through here? Because she has now lost 2 people to this very strange man. But at the time, she didn't really understand what was going on or what to do about it. And that was the last conversation that she had with Daniel. Larry then offered to drive Daniel back to his dorm, and he walked him over to a limo. And when he opened the door, Claudia, Talia, Santos, and Isabella were already inside of the limo. They had been waiting there for 6 hours while Daniel was talking to Larry in the coffee shop. And even though all of this seemed extremely strange to Daniel, all of his friends were in the limo. There was no reason for him not to get in. And now, Larry had Daniel under his spell too. And now, every night, Larry would teach the students. He would teach them about the government, about space, and about all of his strange philosophies. And the students just took this all in. They looked up to Larry. They looked at him as someone who could solve all of their problems. And when they would phone their parents, well, the ones who were still talking to their parents, they would tell them how amazing Larry was, how he was helping them, and how he cared for them. And I think as a parent, you worry enough about your child being out there on their own. And hearing that there was this adult looking out for them must have been a real comfort to them. Now remember Lee Chen, who allowed Larry to move into his Manhattan apartment with him after his first stint in prison? Well, in the summer of 2011, Larry went to live with Lee Chen in his Manhattan apartment once again. And now is probably also a good time for me to tell you that Lee Chen was also a victim of Larry's. He was also manipulated by him and wrapped around his disgusting finger. He also convinced Lee that a bunch of things happened to him that never did. And you're probably thinking, well, at least now Larry's moving out of the Sarah Lawrence student housing. Well, yes, but Larry invited the students to go live with him. The apartment was on the 15th floor on the Upper East Side. There's a little entryway, bathroom, large living room, and only 1 bedroom. First, Larry casually invited Santos to come and stay there over the summer just to help him with renovations, and Santos agreed. Claudia was living close by, so she started spending a lot of time there too. And then naturally, Daniel also started spending time there with all of his friends. And before you knew it, they were all living there. So now, in this 1-bedroom apartment, you've got Lee, who actually owns the place, Larry, Talia, Isabella, Claudia, Santos, and Daniel. That's 7 people. And like I said, this is a 1-bedroom apartment. So almost immediately, Larry takes over. He claims the bedroom for himself and Isabella. And of course, he explains this by saying that Isabella was in a vulnerable state and that she had to be in a bed with him. Everyone else, They just had to sleep in the living room. This is when things started to escalate. He told the students that they needed to take control of their lives, that they needed to get fit and they needed to get healthy. He basically enforced a marine schedule on the students. He would wake them up early and make them do push-ups and all sorts of exercises. He made the men shave their heads and wear bright-colored polo shirts. He said this showed that they were secure in their masculinity. He was adamant the women had to embrace their femininity and the men had to embrace their masculinity. And Larry was almost always awake and watching them. And the reason for this is because he was abusing Adderall. Adderall is a stimulant that is normally prescribed to people with ADHD and narcolepsy. At therapeutic doses, Adderall causes emotional and cognitive effects such as euphoria, change in sex drive, increased wakefulness, and improved cognitive control. At these doses, it induces physical effects such as a faster reaction time, fatigue resistance, and increased muscle strength. And even though the students weren't very thrilled with this new schedule that Larry enforced on them, they started to see the benefits. I mean, they were getting up early, they were eating well, they were getting fit, they could see how they were losing weight, and they felt like they were part of something good. They were still attending their classes and doing everything that they were supposed to do, so this thing with Larry, it was just something beneficial that they were doing for their lives. But in reality, they were under Larry's control and they didn't even know it. As each day went on, things got more and more intense. Larry manipulated them. He implanted memories in their minds of things that never even took place. At the same time, he had them believing that he was the only one who loved them and cared for them. Their parents and loved ones didn't care about them. They didn't care that they were abused when they were young. Larry was the only one that could save them from the world and what happened to them. Slowly, Larry started to strip them of their mental health by claiming he was helping them with their mental health. How wild is that? But by now, they were so under his control that they were mentally dependent on him. And once they were fully under his control, Larry decided to move on to the next phase. Larry started to push a progressive viewpoint and started teaching a lot about sex. He said that everyone was sexual and that everyone just wanted sex and that they needed to learn how to be comfortable with their sexuality. Larry started to ask Daniel if he found Isabella attractive. And sometimes he would do this in front of Isabella. And Daniel, not wanting to be rude, would say yes. And Isabella is a beautiful woman. But Daniel just didn't feel that way about her. And remember, Isabella was also sleeping with Larry and she was also sharing the only bedroom in the apartment with him. But then, one night, all of the roommates were out except for Daniel, Larry, and Isabella. Daniel was asleep on the couch in his boxers while Larry and Isabella were in the bedroom. When all of a sudden, Isabella came out of the bedroom, walked towards Daniel, got on her knees and performed a sex act on him. Daniel said part of him was thinking he should be okay with this. He was a single young man and Isabella was a beautiful woman. But it all just felt so wrong because Daniel knew she had been sent there by Larry. But after this incident, things started to take a really dark turn. Suddenly, Daniel found himself in the position where he felt like he was enrolled in some sort of sexual education class where Larry was his mentor.
Between him and me and Isabella, there would be this private kind of almost course for me to get better because I was struggling with my sexuality and I felt nervous and uncomfortable with sex. And so he was going to kind of be like a professor for the two of us who turned out to get involved, you know? And really what it became was it was pretty clear that he was enacting his sexual desires on Isabella and that I was somehow kind of being used to enable that or something under the guise of him helping me. I was really, really confusing.
Larry would put on these 13th century Gregorian chants and he claimed this would intensify the sexual experience. He would then coach Daniel on how to pleasure Isabella, how to perform sex acts on her, and how to have intercourse with her. And slowly he would just add more and more things to these sessions until, like Daniel said, he started joining in. And now they were having these full-blown threesomes. Daniel always had felt sexually awkward, and even though inside of him somewhere he felt like this was all wrong, he also felt like he was learning a lot about how to please a woman. And so he tried to rationalize this crazy experience in his mind. And if you're wondering where the owner of this apartment, Lee Chen, fits into all of this, let me tell you. Lee was stunned seeing all of these students in his living room just soaking up what Larry said. But things got too weird for him. He said he witnessed group sex. He said Larry also ordered Isabella to perform sex acts on him. And over time, the scales started to fall from Lee's eyes and he just wanted to distance himself from Larry. Larry saw the change in Lee and he started to blackmail him. He told Lee that if he didn't leave the apartment, he would get the girls to phone the police and tell them that Lee was SAing them. And as I said before, the audacity of this man is shocking because remember, Lee actually owns the apartment. It's his place. But then Lee basically just gives up the apartment and moves out because he's scared of Larry. But something I found very interesting is that Lee said that before he left the apartment, he went to Larry and he actually asked him, like, why are you wasting your time with all of these college students? And Larry said, I'm building an army. But after the summer, when Larry asked the students how they felt, they all gave good reports. They said they felt more confident and more secure in their own skin. So it all seemed to be going very well and it all seemed to be very positive. By the fall of 2011, the students were still living with Larry. They were going to all of their classes, but they would return to the apartment afterwards. Santos was speaking to his sister Yalitza, who was a student at Columbia University. She told him that she wasn't doing so great. She had no friends, she was lonely, sad, and depressed. This is when Santos encouraged her to come and visit and meet Larry, and she did. Yalitza immediately felt welcome at the apartment. She said it looked like a little community, and it instantly cured her loneliness. She was having so much fun there, but within no time, she was also under Larry's control. Larry continued enforcing his strict military schedule on the students, and he also started withholding food from them now, saying that they needed to lose weight. Nevertheless, things continued on a somewhat positive note. They spent the holidays together, they decorated a tree together, and it just felt like a little family. But by now, the students were not talking to their families anymore. They weren't really even talking to anyone outside of this group. They avoided other people, declined invitations to parties and get-togethers, and they were basically living in this bubble with Larry. By the spring of 2012, tensions were running high in this apartment. It was cramped and it was a big mess. And then Larry came to the students and said that he knew they could come up with a plan to tidy the space and organize it so that everybody could live there comfortably together. But the fact was that there were just too many people living there. But the students tried their best. Unfortunately, nothing they could do could live up to Larry's expectations. Larry also started making the students take Adderall. He said it would make them more focused and it would help them get things done in their day. But then he started to deprive the students of sleep. He told them that he had to do this because when he got them to a point that they were so exhausted, then they would be all raw nerves and it would be easier for him to help them advance in life. Makes no sense to me, and I can tell you now, I will not advance to anywhere without sleep, but the students trusted him. So now the students were on Adderall, they were sleep deprived, they were being starved, and Larry was still messing with their minds. He started bringing more things into the apartment and would place it in the living room. Eventually, it was so cramped in there, they couldn't move without bumping into something or knocking something down. And this is when Larry started accusing the students of damaging his property. He would interrogate them and accuse them of doing this on purpose. He said that if they made mistakes, they needed to admit them and they needed to be accountable. Otherwise, they would never be successful adults. The students didn't really damage anything though. But Larry was adamant that they did, and that they did it on purpose, and that they owed him. because he was so good to them, and look at what they were doing to him. I mean, he would just go on and on and on and on. And the more they would deny it, the more they said that they didn't do this, the more he would tell them that they needed to take accountability. He would wear them down so much that they would eventually think, like, did I damage his property? Maybe I damaged it and I just don't remember it. And then they would actually admit to doing something that they never did. And they would apologize to Larry. And then Larry would praise them for admitting the truth. And then they would thank him for holding them accountable. I mean, it's totally messed up. But then Larry really started to focus on Santos, and he really started to target him. He kept accusing him of damaging his property. And the more Santos denied it, the angrier Larry got. And Larry got aggressive at this point. And Santos just really started to doubt himself. While Larry would berate Santos, he would get the other students to sit in and give their opinions on everything, to tell Santos how horrible it was of him to do that to Larry. And they would say, like, Santos, come clean, just admit to what you did. And eventually poor Santos was just so worn down that he actually believed that he damaged Larry's property. Santos admitted to damaging things even though he didn't. And he was apologizing to Larry, and he was asking him, how can I rectify this? How can I make this right? And Larry said, well, you could pay me back. He ordered Santos to go and make a list of everything that he damaged. Okay, but remember, Santos never really damaged anything. So he had to go and sit there and think of things to write down. So Santos would list a few things and go to Larry with the list. And Larry would be like, Santos, you're not being truthful with me. You are lying to me. That's not everything. And then Santos would go back. And this kept on happening until Santos just wrote down basically everything that he could see in the apartment. Then Santos had to take this list and he had to try and Google all of the prices of these items that he supposedly damaged. And when I tell you the amount of damages that Santos owed Larry, your jaw will drop to the floor. Larry claimed that Santos owed him $47,000. And poor Santos, he was so scared. I mean, he was just a student. Where was he going to get all of this money? So Santos phoned his parents, who he had basically cut off completely at this point. But he was begging them to help him to pay back Larry for the property he had damaged. Santos's mom could hear how desperate he was, and she actually gave him the only jewelry that she had on her to go and pawn. It was extremely sentimental to her, but she wanted to help her son. Santos went and pawned this jewelry and only got $750 for it. It wasn't enough. He frantically phoned around to find out if anybody could lend him the money just so that he could pay Larry back. But this would become a pattern of Larry's. He would start accusing the students of more and more things, and every time he wore them down and they confessed, he would actually film them on his phone, and he would use that to blackmail them. But then Larry started to target Claudia. Larry had heard, probably through his daughter Talia, that there were all sorts of rumors making their rounds on the Sarah Loris campus about him. Rumors that he was a pervert, that there was something not good going on in that apartment. And Larry blamed these rumors on Claudia. And he wore her down to the point where she just admitted to spreading the rumors, even though she didn't. Larry then made Claudia write an email to the dean and many of the students at Sarah Lawrence. The email was titled The Truth, and in it Claudia said she lied about Larry and that he was a great man and he was unjustly imprisoned, and how wrong and manipulative she was to spread lies about him. When Raven got this email, she was floored. I mean, she couldn't believe it. She knew it wasn't Claudia spreading those rumors, because it was her. Raven was the one talking about Larry on campus. She was telling everyone. She's worried about her friends and something weird is going on. And do you know what the Sarah Lawrence College did after they received this email? Well, reportedly, they did nothing. They did absolutely nothing after receiving this email, which is shocking to me. Claudia's friends on campus started reaching out to her more now, but all she wanted to say to them was that Larry was an amazing person and that if it wasn't for him, she wouldn't even be alive. And at this point, her friends really started to get concerned, but they really didn't know what to do about it. In 2013, the students all entered their senior year at Sarah Lawrence. Daniel actually went to study in England for a little while, and even though there was distance between him and Larry, he was still taking some of his calls, and Daniel was still struggling mentally. By this time, Talia and Santos actually split up, and Talia moved back to the campus, and Santos stayed with Larry in the apartment, which is very strange. Larry kept finding things to tell the students they did wrong. They had to confess while he recorded it. He was still depriving them from food, sleep, and just normal life. And mentally, all of them started to deteriorate even further. But Larry drilled it into their minds that they were becoming better together. They were building something special, and nobody else would understand. But the accusations and the interrogations became worse, and they became physical. Eventually, he was accusing everyone except Isabella that they were conspiring against him and that they wanted to take him down by damaging his property. And then, what do you know? Larry starts accusing them and their parents of working with Bernard Kerik. He makes them believe it. Eventually, he even has poor Santos writing out confessions that he was wearing a wire under instruction from Bernard Kerik so that he and Claudia could take down Larry. Eventually, he had Claudia and Yelitsa admitting to all of this too. And Isabella, she was just always by Larry's side. She was so devoted to him. She was just following him everywhere and just documenting everything. But Larry would abuse her from time to time too. He really confused everyone when it came to Isabella. It was like a father-daughter relationship, but everybody knew that they were having sex too, so it was weird. But it was clear that Isabella wanted to be in a relationship with Larry. But he told her there was no relationship between them. But still, she just stayed by his side. Larry now also became very physical with the students. He hit them, he threw them against walls, and he even made them sleep outside. But the Ray family was about to gain another member. Santos had another sister, Felicia. Felicia studied at Harvard and then got into Columbia Medical School. By this point in our story, Felicia was living in Los Angeles while she was busy doing her residency in psychiatry. She was happy in her job, she was making good friends, and she was just loving her life. And when she had some time off, she decided that she wanted to go visit her sister Yelitsa and her brother Santos in New York. And that is what she did. And the day that Felicia arrived, Larry took her, Santos, and Yelitsa out to a fancy dinner. Afterwards, when they went back to the apartment, Felicia spent hours just talking to Larry. She was very impressed with how he could keep up in the conversation and just how much he knew about psychiatry. And she would later tell her siblings that she had fallen for Larry. She said it was like love at first sight for both of them, and they entered into a relationship. When Felicia returned to LA, she and Larry did the long distance thing. They spoke on the phone, texted, emailed multiple times per day. It didn't take very long for them to tell each other that they loved each other. Felicia was hooked. Larry was saying he wanted to marry her, and he just couldn't wait to have babies with her. She didn't even do anything on weekends anymore. She just wanted to speak to Larry.
You know, on a weekend before I met Larry, I was going out to beach or restaurants or exploring different parts of Los Angeles and, you know, trying new things with my new friends. And then as the months went on, I would spend all weekend on the phone with him. Like from morning to night. And it was all day, every day. And like my phone would die in the middle of us talking, and then he would freak out because I had hung up the phone because my phone died. So that he did become the loudest voice.
And these calls started to get weirder.
I wanted to enjoy my Saturday, and he was talking about trying to get me to talk about like if I had ever like been abused or if I had had sex with my teachers at school. All of these really heavy, very uncomfortable topics, and he just kept pressing them. So by the time I got off the phone, I was just relieved. He had worn down my confidence in myself and my own trust in myself, that I was freaking out, that he was freaking out. I was like, oh no, Larry's upset. How do I fix this? Like, how do I make it better? Like, I'm not even thinking about me anymore.
Right.
I'm not clear-minded anymore when it comes to him because of how he had been wearing on me, like day after day, night after night. He was trying to have like a sexy conversation, and it was like so not sexy to me. But he was like, oh, I bet you blew your math teacher. I'm sure you had sex with like tons of guys in high school. He would try to pry this information from me, and you know, sometimes I would just keep saying no, right? And then he would get upset. He would say like, no, you're lying. I know you're lying to me. You look like a good girl, but I'm sure you were up to a lot of stuff when you were in school. I'm like, no, I wasn't. And then he got so aggressive that I started making stuff up.
Yep.
Like I started saying, yeah, I did it. Yes, I totally did it. Yeah, I had sex with my math teacher. No, I've never had sex with my math teacher. Just broad disclaimer there. I've never had sex with with any teacher. So I started to make things up just to appease him, and then he would be like, "Oh, that sounds good. Tell me more."
Yep.
And I'm like, "Tell you more what?" And and then I would have to like try to make up stories.
And Larry would escalate with Felicia over time. He would ask her to go and have sex with strangers and to record it. From time to time, Felicia would go to New York to visit Larry. And when she was there, he would go all out. He would take her to fancy restaurants and these beautiful hotels. And he would just love bomb the hell out of her. But Felicia always returned to LA. But as time went on, the relationship intensified. Larry eventually convinced Felicia that she was in danger, that he had enemies that would come after her to get to him. Felicia believed this. She was terrified. She didn't want to go out of her apartment. She didn't want to answer the door. She was so scared that people were looking for her and wanted to harm her. Larry eventually convinced her to drag her mattress into the living room and to set up webcams so that he could watch her and protect her. Meanwhile, he's a pervert. And then very suddenly one day, Larry just went to Santos and Yalitza and told them that your sister Felicia is in so much danger, we have to get her out of LA. Santos and Yalitza then spoke to Felicia over the phone, and they could hear how petrified she was. She was scared for her life. And then it wasn't long until Felicia made her way to New York and moved in with all of them. And just to give you some perspective on this was a week before Felicia had to go and write her exam where she would have qualified to be a fully licensed physician. And she just upped and left and went to live with Larry. And Felicia did say that she planned on going back to LA and to continue her life there. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And now that Felicia was in the apartment with everyone, Isabella wasn't very happy about it. Because remember, Isabella wanted to be in a relationship with Larry. She loved Larry. But Larry made it clear to her that he was not willing to be in a relationship with her. But Felicia was also not very happy because the first night that she had to sleep there, she found out that she had to share a bed with Larry and Isabella. So it was Felicia, Larry in the middle, and then Isabella. And Larry told everybody to sleep naked. And if you think that's bad, oh, just you wait. Because Felicia noticed that while they were sleeping, Isabella would cup Larry's genitals in her hand. And when Felicia voiced her unhappiness about this, Larry just told her, oh, she's just comfortable that way. It comforts her. And Felicia just had to accept this. But she did. It's all very, very strange, and it didn't take long at all until Felicia was in the same mental condition as the other students. She was also coerced into believing and confessing that she and her parents were working with Bernard Kerik. Eventually, Larry even makes her believe that her parents will kill her. Within no time, Felicia was but a shadow of herself, and she became unrecognizable. She was fired from her job, and Larry even tore up her residency documents, and he would keep telling her that she would never be able to be a doctor now. One day, just to try and make an escape somehow, Felicia ended up taking a whole bottle of Tylenol. She actually ended up in the hospital, and thankfully they were able to save her life. But very soon, Larry showed up there and he took over. He was talking to all of the doctors, and he eventually convinced Felicia that she had to sign herself out. Reportedly, Larry told the psychiatrist at the hospital that the reason why Felicia did this was because of the toxic relationship that she had with her parents. And he then told Felicia that she had to get out of there because if she didn't, she would ruin her career forever. And from here on out, Larry would actually use this incident to hold over Felicia's head, and he just started accusing her of doing more and more things to him. Felicia, Yalitza, and Santos were constantly begging their parents for money in order to pay Larry back for something they had damaged or something they had stolen. And their parents became extremely worried and suspicious about all of this. They actually went to the police and reported this to them, but the police were not willing to help. They just told them that they couldn't do anything because their children were adults. Eventually, their parents were asking all of their friends to borrow money in order to help their children. And in the time their children were living with Larry, they paid him over $300,000. They lost everything. They lost their home, and they even lost their car. Daniel eventually returned from the UK, and even though he felt like he didn't want to go back to the apartment, Larry convinced him otherwise. It was almost like he went back out of fear. Once Daniel was back living in the apartment, Larry went to him and told him all about Yalitza and Felicia and Santos and Claudia and how they were conspiring with Bernard Kerik to do things to Larry and to bring him down. But Daniel doubted all of this. I mean, it just didn't make any sense. But Larry saw that Daniel didn't believe him, and he told him to go and interrogate his friends. So when Daniel asked them, he could hear his friends say that they actually did this stuff, but it just wasn't adding up. Larry started targeting Daniel for doubting him, and he really focused in on him. And whenever Daniel started thinking about wanting to leave, he would think of all the times he told his parents how great Larry was, and of all the times that Larry helped him. And he was just stuck mentally in this horrible situation with Larry and the other students. He had also cut his family out of his life and all of his other friends, and he didn't even know how to fix that, or if he should. And his parents were really getting worried because whenever Daniel was with Larry, he refused to take their calls. But they really didn't understand or really know what was going on with their son. And now Larry was just starting to pick on Daniel more and more. And one night he asked Daniel if he was still confused about his sexuality. And Daniel made the mistake of being honest, and he told Larry yes, he was. This infuriated Larry. He told Isabella to go get one of her dresses, and Daniel had to put this dress on. He then forced him to go out in public just to humiliate him. He had to go out in public with that dress on. And he filmed everything so that he could use it as blackmail against Daniel. When they got back to the apartment, Larry told Daniel that he had to use Isabella's dildo on himself in front of the whole group. Larry, of course, filmed all of this too. But then it would get even worse because one evening, Larry made some type of rope out of foil and plastic and ordered Daniel to wrap it around his genitals. Larry then twisted it and tightened it, and he tortured Daniel with this. But unfortunately, that was not the end of it, because one evening Larry was accusing Daniel of something yet again, and he actually got a pliers and pulled Daniel's tongue with it and started hitting him with some type of hammer at the same time. Now I'm going to play this clip for you now, but please be warned, this is extremely upsetting.
Trying to parse it Me too. Stick it out. Stick your fucking cock out. Stick next one's gonna be the head of your cock. Do you understand? See this how it feels? Huh? What if I pick you up like that? I'm pick you up by your tongue? Huh? Do you think I'm playing with you? Huh? Huh? You're a grown man, I'm a grown man. I don't like what you did. You hear me? Now one more time and I'm going to split your tongue in half. Do you understand me?
Oh. Yeah.
Huh?
Yes.
You doubting me, Danny?
No.
Huh?
Yeah. Yes.
Doubting me? Still?
No, I know that.
Huh?
I know that you'll hit me. Oh.
Want to doubt me more?
No.
Huh?
No.
I'll bust your face right here. I won't wait till I get downstairs.
No.
Take it to the bank. You and I are fighting it out tonight. Man to man. You can even have the hammer. I told you, beat me with it. You don't start telling the truth. I spent good money to find out these facts, you little piece of shit. And I'm telling you, listen to me.
Yeah.
Listen to me. Don't fuck around with lying now. Tell the truth. Next thing's gonna be out is your dick and balls. Did you like that the other night when your balls were getting strangulated?
No.
Huh? What should I do to them tonight? Apologize for lying to everybody right now. And this just now that you were lying.
Sorry.
Remember, they don't know the facts. I know them, dickhead.
But soon after this, one evening, everybody had to be somewhere. And this was the first time in ages that Daniel was alone in the apartment. And he actually went up to the roof and he was just sitting there thinking about everything and how horrible his life had turned out. At this moment, he realized that if he didn't leave, he would have to take his own life. And coming to that realization was the best thing that could have ever happened to Daniel, because it finally gave him the mental strength to leave the situation. It was a mental breakthrough, and Daniel decided that he had to get the hell out of there and to never look back. He started living on campus again and got a job and tried to piece his life together again. Larry tried to phone him, but Daniel avoided all of his calls. Daniel just hoped his friends could make it out too. Sadly, they were still there, and Larry told them that Daniel had just given up on everything they were trying to build together and that they just should not talk to him again. Santos was really not doing well mentally at this point, and the Sarah Lawrence College actually put him on medical leave. Now Santos was even more isolated. He had no friends to talk to, and now that Daniel was gone, Larry focused in on him again. But in spring of 2013, Talia, Isabella, Daniel, and Claudia graduated. Santos sadly didn't. By the summer, Larry went to Pinehurst, and the students went with him. Larry's stepdad owned property there, and Larry wanted to fix it up for him. The students helped Larry with everything, and it was hard labor. But it seemed like Larry became even more erratic here. He was taking more and more Adderall. He was never sleeping, so the students never had a moment of peace. And he also became more aggressive. This is where the students' relationships with each other also started falling apart. Felicia was literally a shell of herself, and she had broken down completely. Larry told Yalitza, who was Felicia's younger sister, to watch her and to babysit her. But this would trigger Felicia, and she would freak out. And then Larry would blame Felicia's state of mind and deterioration on Yalitza. And this is where Larry started to target Yalitza. You see, Larry was having some health problems. He had rashes all over his legs and wounds that were just not healing. And he somehow came to the conclusion that this was all because Yalitza was poisoning him. And by this time, Yalitza was also just trying to survive the wrath of Larry. And he wore her down to the point where she just admitted to poisoning him, even though she never did. She even came to the point where she admitted to poisoning her sister Felicia. And as more time went on, she started telling them that she did this because her parents told her to do this. But none of this was true. Larry was literally planting things into their minds, and he made them believe all of the stuff. But when Yelitsa confessed to all of this, she saw her sister, Felicia, looking at her in disbelief, so hurt and disappointed, believing that she tried to poison her sister and other people broke something inside of her. But along with her breaking point came a moment of mental clarity. A few nights later, Yelitsa snuck out and walked away from Larry and his twisted world. She walked to the train station and took a train back to New York. And when she got to New York, she had to live in supportive housing and she had to try and piece her life back together somehow. But as you can imagine, this was extremely difficult for Yelitsa to do. I mean, she had cut her family out of her life. She wasn't speaking to her parents anymore. She believed that they were trying to kill her and that they had convinced her to poison people. And her siblings were still in Larry's clutches. And sadly, they would stay with Larry for years. By 2015, Felicia was completely broken. She wasn't a functional human anymore.
Okay, but I need you to calm down. I need you to calm down. I need you to calm down first.
And Larry and Isabella would just keep messing with her mind. They never gave her a moment of peace.
Please stop, Felicia. Please stop. Please stop trying to attack me. Please stop.
I'm on video. I'm watching. Why are we doing that?
So I'm going back to bed. Goodbye, guys.
Why are we doing
Good
that?
night.
Why are we doing that?
I hear a pill bottle opening and closing.
Spit him out. Spit him?
It's too late. I took Adderall.
How many?
Just a half pill.
Why did you take my medication? Come on.
I wanted to take.
They eventually returned to the Manhattan apartment, but now that Yelitsa was gone, things were even worse because everybody was just turning on each other because nobody wanted to be in the dog box with Larry.
I want to go to the bed.
Please, come on. No, come here. Listen. You gotta sit down on the floor.
I want to bed.
Alicia, lay down.
Santos, who was the sweetest person, became someone who was always screaming and yelling and telling on everybody. And he just couldn't take it anymore. They were losing their minds, and Santos started thinking of escaping. So the one day, he just packed all of his stuff and he just left. Felicia phoned Santos when she saw him leave, and he told her he was not coming back. And Felicia, she just cried and told him now Larry was going to blame her for Santos leaving. But instead, Larry started targeting Claudia. Now that Santos was gone, Larry had fully convinced Claudia that she had not only poisoned him, but also his daughter Talia and many of her own friends. Larry actually then made a website and put everything that Claudia had supposedly done to him on this website. There were written confessions as well as very disturbing video of Claudia confessing to everything Larry was accusing her of. By this point, he was also accusing her of stealing money from him. But with all this supposed money that she owed him, Larry said she would have to find a way to pay him back. And soon. And sadly, this is when Larry forced Claudia into prostitution. He placed her on an escort website and he named her Lauren Avery and forced her to exchange her body for money. Claudia had to do this day in and day out, over and over again, and she had to give all of the money to Larry. And Isabella was the one keeping track of all the money for Larry. Over the period that Claudia worked as a sex worker, she had given Larry over $2.5 million. And this was when Claudia also just couldn't cope anymore. She started talking to one of her clients and shared what she was going through, and reportedly this man was trying to tell her that this was not normal. Larry then found out that Claudia had told this client, and he went to her hotel room and proceeded to torture her for 7 hours while Isabella filmed it. He stripped Claudia naked, tied her to a chair, suffocated her, poured cold water on her, choked her, and even cut off her hair. Claudia believed that she was going to die that day. And as additional punishment, Larry sent the website, the one he created where Claudia confessed to poisoning him and doing all sorts of things that she never did. He sent that to all of her former friends that lived with her in Sloanham Woods. And this was Claudia's breaking point, because after being under Larry's control for just under a decade, whereof she was doing sex work for 4 years for him, she decided to finally make her escape. She asked one of her clients to buy her a train ticket to Philadelphia. He agreed, and Claudia left. Raven, the friend who Claudia had cut off, the friend who was trying to warn everyone against Larry, received a message that told her to go and check out a website, claudiadrury.com. She did, and she was absolutely shocked when she saw her once close friend plastered all over the website with headings reading, "I attempted to murder people by poisoning them," and that she was on Bernard Kerrick's payroll. On this website, there were many confessions that were made by Claudia. There was even a confession saying that she poisoned her Sloanham Woods roommates. But then Raven saw a video that made her stomach drop. Raven could instantly tell that something was wrong. Claudia's body language, the way she spoke, how thin she was, everything was just wrong. It was so clear that Larry was forcing her to confess to all of this nonsense he was accusing her of. Claudia looked like she couldn't keep her eyes open in the video, like she wasn't in her right mind. Raven then found a number on the website, but she wasn't about to phone it because she knew it would just lead her straight to Larry. So she decided to Google it. And when she did, her jaw dropped to the floor. There she saw her friend, Claudia, named Lauren Avery, selling her body to strange men. This was beyond disturbing. It had been years since she had any contact with Claudia, but she wanted to help her. She reached out to Gabe and Max, who also were once Claudia's friends and roommates, and everyone was heartbroken and disturbed by all of it. Max actually went to the police to report all of this, but the police really didn't believe him at all. They didn't give his story the time of day. This is when Claudia's old friends reached out to another man that also used to go to Sarah Lawrence. His name is Ezra Marcus. Ezra was a freelance writer and looked into everything and found it to be very suspicious. He had connections at the New York Magazine, and he shared this information with them. James Walsh from the New York Magazine jumped on the case and did some further investigating. Then he uncovered who Larry was, and he started to dig into his past. He even came across the report that the forensic examiner wrote during Larry's custody battle. And this raised even more alarm bells because everything James was uncovering was pointing to the fact that this man, Larry Ray, was a con artist, a phony, and definitely a cult leader. James reached out to Larry to hear his side of the story and was quite surprised to find out that Larry was willing to talk to him. Larry, of course, maintained his innocence. He said that the website that he made of Claudia, that was all Claudia's doing, and it was all handwritten confessions made by Claudia herself. And yes, Claudia was doing sex work and giving him the money, but that was her choice. Larry tried to normalize all of this and make it sound credible, but James wasn't falling for it. Once they completed their investigation, they realized that this man, Larry Ray, was beyond evil, and he had stolen years and years from these college students' lives. In April of 2019, the New York Magazine posted the article, and this unbelievable story spread like wildfire. And then many more articles came out. For the students that had already escaped, this was extremely shocking, but it was also validating. They were still in the healing process. They were trying to piece their lives back together after everything Larry had done to them. And finally, the story seemed to grab the attention of the police too. This is when they started questioning Santos, Daniel, and Yelitsa. The police had gotten their hands on some of the recordings Larry made, and this turned out to be very helpful for them in the investigation. After 5 years of Larry taking over Lee Chen's apartment, Lee finally managed to evict him. Larry, Isabella, and Felicia then moved to one of his friends' homes in New Jersey. In February of 2020, the FBI raided this home in New Jersey and finally arrested Larry Ray. He was charged with 9 counts, including sex trafficking, extortion, forced labor, and money laundering. Felicia and Isabella were still with Larry at this point. They never could find the strength to leave on their own. But the funny thing was, it seemed like they were still under his spell, even after he had been arrested. They were still refusing to speak to their families. They were still living in the house in New Jersey together. And when police questioned them, they denied ever being mistreated. In fact, they spoke of Larry as a hero. Isabella even made a video saying that she was standing by Larry's side and that she would never stray from the truth. Hulu then decided to create an incredible documentary on this case called Stolen Youth. It consists of 3 episodes, and in the 3rd episode, Felicia and Isabella agreed to talk, but they were still staying in Larry's friend's house in New Jersey. And they were still defending Larry. Felicia even says that she was not practicing as a doctor because she was poisoned. It wasn't Larry's fault. She actually says her family members are to blame, and Larry was her biggest supporter. She even spoke about how great Larry was in the military and how he worked for NATO and the CIA. Felicia even referred to him as her husband. Isabella spoke of how heartbroken she was that he was in prison, that he didn't deserve it. These girls were fully brainwashed and in complete denial. But a few days after this was filmed, Felicia and Isabella ended up moving out of Larry's friend's house in New Jersey. And it was like they just vanished for a while. But then Isabella eventually reached out and she appeared on the Hulu documentary again. And this was the part where I was really hoping that Isabella would be clear-minded, that she would see things for what they were. But unfortunately, she was still longing for Larry. She was now living in Staten Island, and she was just waiting for him to hopefully get bail. She even bought him a new shirt just in case he got out. Luckily though, Felicia had gained some clarity since moving out of the house and parted ways with Isabella. When Felicia appears again on the Hulu documentary, she is a little more clear. She looks a whole lot better, but she is still confused. She doesn't know what was real and what was not, and still claimed that she met Bernard Kerik, even though we know she never did. She was still scared of her parents and siblings because Larry told her that they tried to kill her. But she wasn't sure about that anymore. But still, she was too scared to reach out. But over time, Felicia finally was able to realize that Larry had seriously messed with her memories, her way of thinking, and that he had stolen her sanity from her. And seeing Felicia on this documentary trying to unravel everything mentally was really tough to watch. But the moment that she made contact with her parents again for the first time, after cutting them off for years, It just broke my heart. It was absolutely beautiful to see her not only reunite with her parents, but also with the truth. The trial only started in 2022 and lasted for 4 weeks. Most of the students testified, and Larry was acting a fool. He put up a hell of an act and even faked seizures, which he said were caused by poisoning. This man never gives up. He was literally still trying to convince people that he had been poisoned. In the end, Larry helped the prosecution out a lot because he had documented and recorded his own crimes for years, and everyone got to watch how he manipulated, controlled, and used and abused these students for almost a decade. And then a verdict was reached.
Been reached in the Sarah Lawrence sex cult case here in New York City. The 62-year-old defendant, Lawrence Ray, is found guilty on a 15-count indictment of federal crimes related to the manipulation and extortion of a group of his daughter's Sarah Lawrence college friends after living in her on-campus housing back in 2010. Just a few of his original 17 charges include racketeering, extortion, sex trafficking, forced labor, and money laundering. 2 counts were dropped by the end of the trial for technical reasons. He faces life in prison for his alleged crimes. Law and Crime's very own
Isabella Pollock was also charged for her part in everything and eventually pleaded guilty. Her lawyers argued that she should not serve time for helping Larry because she had become a broken automation. But the judge didn't agree and said she had choices. She was eventually found guilty in February of 2023 and sentenced to 4 years in prison for abetting abuse. For the very first time at her own trial, Isabella was able to acknowledge that Larry was controlling her and that he was a bad man. Up until that moment, she was still defending him. I'm curious to know actually what you think about that sentencing. I mean, part of me feels like Isabella was a victim of Larry's too, right? I mean, there's no denying that. But then I also think about all of the things that she did to help him. So basically, I'm just conflicted about that sentence, but let me know what you think of it. From what I could find, Sarah Lawrence College never took any real responsibility for what I believe to be negligence. How could a parent, fresh out of prison, be living with students on campus? And they didn't even know about it. They released a statement that honestly just further infuriated me because the statement, in my opinion, was basically all about pointing out that this mostly happened off campus and that Sarah Lawrence is not to blame. I happen to disagree. After Larry and Isabella's sentencing, it was time for the victims to really heal. I'm happy to say that all of them reconnected with their families and started working on repairing the relationships that Larry had broken. Claudia also reconnected with her family and is living a normal and low-key life now. Dan actually went on to write a book about his experience called Slow No More It's 9, and I highly recommend that you read it. I don't know if Talia is still under her dad's spell, but from what I could find out, she is working as a paralegal in North Carolina, and that's basically all I know. But I will say that I was a bit perplexed that the police arrested Isabella, but they didn't arrest Talia. I don't know. It's a bit weird. Let me know how you feel about that too. There's also a movie out about this sickening case called A Devil on Campus, wherein the actor Billy Zane plays Larry. I actually have not seen it, but I will as soon as I have the time. This case to me was absolutely shocking. As I said in the beginning, nobody expects that their child will go off to college and just join a cult. We have other fears for our children, sure, but joining a cult is naturally just not one of them. But I think it will be now. Watching these students suffer under the control of this disgusting human being was really just so difficult to watch. The video of Daniel with the pliers, I mean, it upset me so much. I'm a boy mom and I'm thinking of my son, and if I ever had to see a man do that to my son, I mean, who's going to stop me? I would kick that door down. I would get to my son somehow. No one's going to stop me, I can promise you that. Also, just what he did to Claudia, that's just mind-blowing. He literally ruined who she was and made her do things that she would never have done. I mean, it is despicable what this man did. And she had to give him all of that money. I mean, it's so disturbing. But the funny thing is, the one who really broke my heart was actually Santos. And let me tell you why. Because Santos, I can see the kindness in his face. I can see how soft he is. And this man just walked all over him and just took advantage of him and completely broke him down. And I think you'll understand what I'm saying if you actually go and watch the documentary, because my heart just broke for him. I also see my son as a sort of softie and, you know, just this kind little person. But to think of a man doing that to him, let me not get into it because I can go on forever about this. But I cried a lot about this case because it's just so hard to watch. These were promising students and he ruined their lives. And now they have to try and piece it back together after everything he did. This man is disgusting. But I'm happy to say that he was sentenced to 60 years, so he will not be coming out of prison, which is great. But unfortunately, I think the damage he did is quite lasting on these students. I can only imagine. But I'm rooting for them, and I believe that they will make a full mental recovery after all of this. But please, I am dying to know what you think of this case. How do you feel about it? How do you feel about Isabella's sentencing? How do you feel about Talia never being sentenced? And how do you feel about Larry? Be sure to let me know. And if you enjoy these type of episodes, you can head on over to my playlist and search Cultish Crimes. There are many more just like this one that I think you'll really enjoy. But that's about it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please stay safe, and I will see you in the next one.